try starting again.
Let's continue.
We didn't on the sound. Right. So we'll start again, this time with sound. We're going to have a look at some quadratic equations. Now, they come in various different forms, and let's have a look at some of those. We come across where we've got basically quadratic equations which we will solve by factorization. We are then going to solve them sometimes by completing the square. And we can also have quadratic equations where we can use the formula. And those are primarily the three ways we come across quadratic equations. A quadratic equation is in the form a x squared, let's zoom in a little bit, plus, or it could be minus, bx plus, could be minus, some number, and usually that equals 0. Now, if we have the number 0 here, we normally ask to solve the equation. If we have it just as ax squared plus bx plus c, then we'll normally be asked to just factorize this. So we have our choices of what to do. So sometimes they will give you hints about how to do something. Let's look at one of these and see how we go about it. So I've got x squared plus 8x plus 15. Now there's no equals 0, so that suggests to me that I just need to factorize this. So what I've got to do is I've got to find two numbers that either add up or subtract to make this number, and that are factors of this number that basically multiply to make this number. All right, so how do we go about this? Well, there are several choices. The first of these choices could be that we might use a calculator. And we can, using the Casio calculator, it's got a menu. And if we just navigate the menu system, we've got equations and functions. If we select this, we can choose number 2 for polynomials, and this is an x squared, so we want a 2, and there it gives us the formula for our quadratic equation. And we could type it in, and it will solve it for us. Now, that's not bad, but quite often we're going to have a system whereby this is a paper perhaps that doesn't have a calculator, and you've got to try and show all your working. Let's see what we can do. We want some numbers that multiply together to make 15. Okay, so our factors of 15 are going to be 15 and 1. And of course, we can have another one. We can have 5 and 3. Now I'm going to try and make 8. And this pair look the obvious set to make 8, 5 plus 3, going to make 8. So there are factors. So we write down our two sets of brackets. We know we've got an x in both, because they're going to multiply together to make x squared. And our two numbers are 5 and 3. Everything is positive, so these numbers are going to be positive. And we've done it. Okay, let's try a different one and see what we can do with this. Let's have a different quadratic. Let's have this time x squared plus 7x plus 12. Now, I've chosen this one because this gives a whole variety of different factors to worry about for the 12. The 12 is 12 and 1, but we've also got 6 and 2, and we've got 4 and 3. So we've got a variety of factors, but only one of those is going to make 7, and it is this one. So, as again, we write out our brackets, we can put in our x, and then we can put in our numbers, and because we've got these both plus, then we have two pluses in there. Wow, it's going quite nicely so far, isn't it? Let's look at a third. This time I'm going to write it out slightly differently because we're going to have our x squared plus 6x plus 8, and this time it's going to equal 0. This time we know we've actually got to solve the quadratic equation. Right? We perform this exactly as before. I've got my number 8, and that's going to be 8 and 1. We can make 4 and 2. And I want to make 6, so 4 and 2 looks like our candidate here. Let's write down our brackets. And this time we know it equals 0. So I've got my x's. Then we can put my numbers in, 4 and 2. Everything's positive, so we put in our 2 plus signs. Now I know that this number times this number makes 0. So I've got x plus 4 equals 0, because if this is a number and we multiply by 0, it's going to give us 0. So we're going to assume that x plus 4 equals 0. Take the 4 over to the other side, so we're going to take away 4 from both sides, and we see that x equals minus 4. In the same way, we can look at this sum, and we can say that if x plus 2 times 0, if this one's 0, then let's work out what this is going to be. So we've got x plus 2 equals 0. Let's take away 2 from both sides to eliminate that, and x equals minus 2. There was a simpler way of doing that, and we'll try looking at that in our next sum. So let's have a look at another quadratic equation. This time I'm going to choose something a little easier. So we're going to go for x squared plus 4x plus 3. Easier because the factors here of 3 are only 3 and 1. And that's going to make 4. And we've only got one choice. So it is easier for us. We can write out our brackets. This equals 0. and we put in our x's, we put in our numbers, everything's positive, so we leave these as positive, and rather than go through that rigmarole, you can see that that one was +4, it became -4. This one +2 became -2. So in the same way, x here will equal, swap the signs, -3, or x will equal, swap the signs, -1. And that gives us our quadratic. Well, so far, we've only been looking at positive roots. And of course, quadratics don't do that. You might be lucky and get a simple one like that, but not normally. So let's have a look at a quadratic that doesn't necessarily have positive roots. Right, so get your paper in a decent place. And this time I'm going to have something a little bit harder. So let's try something with a rotten number. X squared minus 6x plus 8. Slightly more difficult because we've got a minus sign here. Let's have a look and see how we solve it. In exactly the same way, I know I've got my numbers have got to add up or subtract to make 6 and multiply to make 8. So we've got 8 and 1 and we've got 4 and 2. Well, again, I can see that it's going to be the 4 and 2. But they're going to be different. I've got to make -6. No 0. So I'm only going to factorize this one, put my x's in. I'm going to put my 4 in. I'm going to put my 2 in. Now, if these are both negative, then -4 and -2 will give us the -6 if we add them up. And a -4 times a -2 will give us +8. Minus times a minus is a positive. So we're going to have 2 negatives in there. Let's look at another one of these. And this time we'll set it to be equal to 0. I've got x squared minus 5x plus 6. The same type of sum. I've got here a negative and a positive. Let's see what we've got. 6. Well, I can make a 6 with 1 and a 6, and I can make it with a 3 times a 2. We have a problem. You see, I could have 6 take away 1, gives me 5, or I can have 3 minus 3 minus 2 will make -5. But we've got to multiply these to make +6. So therefore, both of my numbers have got to be negative. This one would be positive, one would be negative, so it can't be that one. But instead, it's got to be this one. So we write down our x. And we've got -3 and -2. Now, if we'd made this equal to 0, and that equaling 0, then I'd know I'd have to solve this. And my answer will be now x equals 3, change the sign, and x equals 2, change the sign. Well, we're making headway here. let's just try one more of these. I've got x squared minus 4x plus 3. Believe that if you do enough practice on this, that you will actually manage to do every quadratic equation that you can come across before the exams. Don't bank on it, but we'll try. I'm keeping the numbers fairly simple. Let's set that equal to 0. So now I've got factor of 3, and this is going to be, again, can only be 3 and 1. This is positive, this is negative, so we've got to have both negative numbers because they're going to multiply together to make plus 3, and a minus times a minus is a plus, and we can add those up, which is going to give me my brackets of minus 3 and minus 1. That equals 0, so I know that x equals plus 3 or x equals plus 1. I can put the plus in or not. Now, let's make this a little bit more difficult. And I'm going to generate a very simple and very similar quadratic to this. So let's have x squared minus 2x minus 3. Now, this case, both signs are minus, and this now gives us a bit more of a headache. I've chosen 3 because I want to make sure that we don't have any problems to start with our factors. So we've got 3 and 1. I've got to make minus 2. Now, you've probably worked out what we've got to do. We've got our x and we've got our x. We've got our factors of 3 and 1. Now, this number here is negative. So if this is negative, then I'll write this out, then the largest number must be negative. So that one's going to be negative, and this one will be positive. And we've got minus 3 plus 1 gives us minus 2. So it's going to work out. Let's try a different one. I've got x squared minus 2x minus 8. Again, the same type of problems we had before. We've got both negative numbers. So to make a negative number here, and I've got the 8, I've got 8 and 1, I've got 4 and 2. One of these numbers needs to be negative to give me the negative 8. And I've got to make minus 2. Well, 8 and 1 I can't do much with to make a minus 2, but I can cope with a 4 and a 2. We'll draw out our brackets again, put in our x's, and now we can put in our terms, 4 and 2. The middle term is negative, yep. Then the largest number, our 4 must be negative. And that's going to work out because I've got here minus 4x plus 2 minus 4 plus 2 gives me minus 2, and it all works out. Let's do the same thing this time, but what we're going to do is this time we'll solve the equation. Leave my fact just up there. And I'll move my window down to the bottom. Let's have x squared minus 2x minus 15. Same type of problem. The middle term is negative. So therefore, the largest number must be negative. So let's look at 15. My factors of 15, 15 and 1, that'll give me 14. That's useless. And we've got 5 and 3. 5 and 3, yeah, I can get 2. So let's put down our x's. And now my factors are 5 and 3. My middle number is negative. The largest number, therefore, must be negative. And this one is positive. Now, if we set that equal to 0, then I'd have to solve this problem. So now x will equal, change the sign, 5, or x will equal, change the sign, minus 3. And that gives us another quadratic. So that's trying to take some simple ideas with quadratics. Hopefully not too difficult. Let's see if we can then make this a little bit harder. Let's solve something slightly nastier. And let's have perhaps some harder numbers. And this will give us a little bit more of a problem. If I take x squared plus 2x minus 24. My middle term this time is positive. Okay, so the other rule's not going to apply. Well, yeah. So our middle term here is positive. If it is, then our largest number must be positive. Let's work out our factors. 24. Well, there are lots, aren't there? 24, we've got 24 and 1. We've got 12 and 2. We've got 6 and 3. Sorry, we haven't. We've got 6 and 4. We've got 8 and 3. I was trying to go down and sort them out in order. 1, 2, 3, 4. I failed. There are factors. Right, we want to try and make 2. 8 and 3, no. 12 and 2, no. 24 and 1, no. Yes, it was going to be 6 and 4. Let's draw in our brackets. Put in our x's. And we know we've got 6 and we've got 4. The answer is positive, so our largest number out of these two is going to be positive, and that one's negative. So hopefully not too bad at trying this out. Let's try generating a different type of one, so very similar. So I've got x squared plus 5x minus 14. Looking at this one, we've got our 14 as our factor. Well, I can only think of 14 and 1 and 7 and 2. We've got to make plus 5. Our middle term is positive, therefore our largest number is going to be positive. We'll set this to be 0, so we solve it. So I'm writing my x's, and we can put in 7 and 2. My middle term is positive. My largest number must be positive, and the other one negative. We know that equals 0, so my answer is going to be x equals minus 7 and x equals plus 2. Well, we've done all right so far, but they can make our lives more difficult. And we can make our lives slightly more difficult if we get something a little bit nastier. And here, let's just make something a little bit nastier to try and solve. And I've got perhaps something that requires a little bit more thought. And let's try this one. X squared plus x minus 2. Our middle term here is positive. Okay, so let's go ahead and try this one. My factors of 2 are only going to be 2 and 1. Okay, so let's have a go and see what we get. Let's open up our brackets. We've got our x's, and we've got 2 and 1. So now what I've got is my middle term is positive, so my largest number must be positive, and my other one is going to be negative. If we set this all equal to 0, then I can solve this, and x here is going to equal minus 2, and x here is going to equal 1. Now, sometimes these things don't work out quite as we expect, and we can have something a little harder. Let's try something that's going to be a little bit more difficult. And we'll try something a little bit harder. X squared minus 1.5x minus 7. Oh, that doesn't look very nice, does it? I've got factors of 7, okay. So my factors of 7 are only 7 and 1. Well, this isn't going to go very nicely, is it? Because I've got to make 1.5. Means I'm struggling a little bit. And what we can do to solve this is we could use either a little bit of logic, or we could use a formula. I'm going to try a little bit of logic on this and see what we can do. I've got to make the number 7. Yeah, that's easy enough to make 7, because something times something's going to give me 7. 7 times 1 is going to give me 7. But I've got to get this 1.5. So what else could make 7 and 1.5? Well, I could say this is going to be 3.5 and 2. 2 3.5s make 7, and 3.5 take away 2 is going to give me 1.5. So I can do that. I can put in my number of 3.5 and 2. Now, which one's going to be the negative? Well, my largest number is the negative. And there we have it. So I've now got x equals 3.5 and x equals 2. Really not a nice sum to try and work out. Now, if we play around with some of these quadratics, sometimes we get some more horrible numbers. And if we're going to do that, then we're going to need to use the formula. So let's have a look at trying to use the formula and see what we can do with this. My formula is one that's memorized from deep in my history. X equals minus b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all divided by 2a. And we remember our quadratic is in the form ax squared plus bx plus c. Right? So no problem there, because if I take a suitable quadratic to have a look at, and we'll just try one of these, we'll have x squared minus 14x plus 48, and I can try to solve this. We're going to use the formula this time. I could factorize this, but I want to use the formula instead. So this is ax squared, so a is going to equal 1. This is I minus bx in this case, so b is going to equal minus 14. I haven't made my life easy here. And we've got c equals 48. Let's look at our formula. So we've got minus b, which is minus 48 14, which is going to give me plus 14, plus or minus the square root of 14 squared, and it's going to be minus 14 squared, minus 4 times a, which is 1, times c, which is going to be 48. And all of that goes over 2 times a, which is 1. We can simplify this out if we want to. This is going to be x equals 14 plus or minus the square root of. Now I'm going to have 14 squared. So 14 squared is easy enough, especially if you lost the mouse. So I'm just going to put this back into calculator mode, and I'm going to put in my number 14 squared. So there we are. 196 minus, and I want to work out the rest, which is going to be minus 4 times 1 times 48. And unimpressively, I've got answer, which was not what I wanted there. So I did the 196 to start with. So let's just edit that equation. Gives me 192. Yeah, I did choose this one for a reason. All over 2a, which is 2. 196 minus 192 is going to give me 4. So I've got 14 plus or minus 4 all over 2. What I can then do is I can then put this into my calculator. So let's try that. So I'm going to have my sum, which is going to be 14 plus or minus. I'm going to choose, I can only put 1 in, and then it's going to be the square root of, and it's going to be not my fraction. I didn't want that, okay. Which is going to be the square root of 4 all over 2. Let's just work that out. So that's going to give me, square root of 4 is going to give me 16 over 2. Which is going to give me the number 8. And then I've also got 14 plus or minus square root of 4, which is 2. Over 2. So 14, this time we're going to do the minus 2, which is going to give me 12 over 2, which gives me 6. But there's an easier way. Let's do the same sum. Menu. And I'm going to navigate down to my equation and I'm going to accept that. We're going to do a polynomial. And now it's going to be a squared. I do like it when the calculator didn't do what I wanted it to do. So this first number is going to be a 1. The second number is going to be a minus 14. It's the same sum as we had before. And the last number is going to be 48. So I've placed it into the calculator. Equals, my first answer is going to be 8. Oh, that's what we had. And my second answer is going to be 6, which is what we had. So this made it quite nice trying to solve some of these things. Most of them you get are going to be horrible numbers, and they'll give you a hint. And they'll often say, when you work out this quadratic equation, then let's have this to 2, or maybe they might give you 3 decimal places. And if I have a nasty quadratic, then we can just put one of these in to try and solve something. So let's try one. X squared minus 3x, and we'll try 8. When I usually try some of these things, they usually don't work terribly well because I haven't sorted out beforehand what's going to work out, but we'll try it. And let's see if we've got here my A, my B, and my C. My A is going to be 1, B is going to be minus 3, C is going to be 8. So we've got minus B plus or minus the square root of B squared, minus 3 squared, minus 4 times A times C, all over 2A, which is in this case just 2. Well, let's try it on the calculator and see what we've got. So let's put in my 1. My next number is going to be, all right, let's try it again. We're going to put in the 1 equals, my next number is a minus 3. And my last number is going to be an 8. And if we solve this, then yes, typically my calculators come up with an error for me. Every time I try this, I get one of these nasty ones. It's got this funny little eye that tells me I chose very badly in my quadratic. And it's one that cannot be solved. Because we've simply got one of these horrible numbers. Now, why can't it be solved is where I want to finish up today. So let's have a look at what is a quadratic equation and what's going on. Now, if I draw out a graph of a quadratic equation, then it can either look like that for an x squared, it can look like this for an x squared, or it can look like this for an x squared. Now these lines obviously do go on, I just drew a simple one. If it crosses the line, then I've got a value for x. So we can have for this one, and I'm going to give this graph a label A, this is going to have two answers. This is your ordinary quadratic equation that you do. And we've got here something like x equals 2 and x equals 4. This one, I've only got one answer. What's going on here? So let's have a look and see what this one's doing. I've got another quadratic, x squared minus 4x plus 4. Let's solve it. This is an easy one to do. We've got 4. That's going to be either 4 and 1 or 2 and 2. I've got to make simply here 4. So that's going to be my 2 and my 2. X here is 2 and 2. It's got to be negative, so the largest number is going to be negative. It doesn't make any difference. So one of these is going to be negative. One of these is going to be here. Oh, no, it's not. They're going to be negative, aren't they? Because it's both here negative and that's positive. Both are going to be negative, so x equals 2 or x equals 2. One answer. So for this graph, if I were to draw it, both meet when x equals 2 at this one point. And so here, for this one, up the top, there is one answer. And then for the other one that I tried, we had a peculiar system. This is my graph, and it doesn't cross the x-axis. And if it doesn't cross the x-axis, then there are no answers. And we get a peculiar symbol comes up on my calculator of having something like this, 3 minus root 23 I over 2. And the I here is telling me that, yeah, probably only an idiot can work the answer out. It's actually something called an imaginary number. And for that, you'd have to go on to further A-level to have a look at that one. So in this, we've just had a look at solving some simple quadratic equations. There are more difficult ones where we can put a number in front of the first x. Like this, I can do a 3x squared plus 2x plus 4 or something, and try and solve that. But that one is for our next lesson on Thursday, which is scheduled, and hopefully I'll see you then. You take care. Stay safe. Bye-bye.